Welcome, everyone. This is Tristan McGough, your philosopher at large, and today we're going to consider, in session number 7 on Selfology 101, a different view of the self. It's a view of the self where the self is taken as the pilgrim, the psychonaut. In this sense of the self, of which we've referred to before, the last time we were speaking of the self as cognos, where it's that pristine cognition we all have where selfhood, if you will, really begins with an individual conscious being, with a mind. And then people can dispute whether that mind extends, for instance, into the animal kingdom, and whether they have selves or self-conscious beings, and even its proto-stages or not, however you want to divide. Of course, it's all by metrical standard, meaningful measurement in Maya. However, they're all individual relativistic perspectives. We're looking for something that's commensurable, something standards by which we can gauge through correct categories the various aspects and elements of the world. And these are given to us, first of all, as intuitional ideas of which we all have. So when we speak of the self, and there are 7 such pristine ideas, we often refer to the self as a single entity, and that's the self as aeon. It's the all-equalizing consciousness of self, in which everything that is an individual being, an A1, is actually part of this concept of self, this pristine idea of self. Other individuals have the capability of not only comprehending that through that lens of the self, but they also comprehend that the self is all. It's all-encompassing. It's the one and only soul and single all and everything of infinite being, finite being, non-being, and conscious being. And then there are those, and we're all capable of all these pristine reflections on these ideas. We look at the self as what's real. Well, briefly, we considered that in a previous episode in which we discussed reality as containing 4 fundamental ingredients. Those being, of course, infinite being, finite being, non-being, and conscious being. And of course, then we have the concept of the cosmos. And the cosmos is an ordered whole. It's filled up completely. And here's where we look through a tripartite lens, and we see that there's a triverse of the paraverse, the multiverse, the universe. We see that that's divided between a macrocosm, a microcosm, and then the minocosms that compose that microcosm. And then, of course, the last session, we spoke of the self as cognos, and that's where most people begin as personalities with an embedded subjects and apparently extruded objects in the world. That's where people usually begin to define the self as themselves, because it's first-hand experience. You have reflexive consciousness, which means it's recursive. Your consciousness not only is capable of being aware of everything and anything, it knows transparently that it's aware, and that we call the intuition. So even though you may be having a mistaken idea that later you can correct. At the time you're having that idea, it is fully intuitable. So that you are intuiting in your clear, pure consciousness, your self-consciousness, a mistaken idea, which you believe to be true at the time and later may correct, such as the classic metaphor of the coiled rope that's in the darkened room and hiding in the shadows, and someone enters the room and they mistake that for a coiled serpent. Well, that's the interpretation of the mind, of course. That's part of the way that we unroll our mind into the world. Now, today what we're going to consider is the psychonaut. That is the individual who is waking up to all the abilities that they intrinsically are and have. And that's why this is sometimes characterized as the intuitional idea of the self as into itself. This is where you get into the within of things. This is where the interior scape, your own inner mental world, becomes vividly alive as you begin to mine the elements of your own ontology, your own being. It's here as the psychonaut that the cybernaut, which is what the empirical personality is prior to waking up, it's growing, it's developing, it's interacting, it's adapting, it's insinuating itself in the finite world. That's the empirical ego, that's the empiric self. That's the very definition of the empiric self. It's that part of consciousness that can deal with the finite. On the other hand, your transcendental ego, your epistic self, your psychical nature, these are transfinite. They come from the infinite. They appear as some finite idea, feeling, thought, vision, interaction, gesticulation. It doesn't matter how consciousness inserts itself into the world. When it does so from an infinity of possibilities. And the freedom of self-reflexive consciousness is that you can choose, if you're not bound by your cis formations, that is, by those obscurations, those afflictions that keep you cycling in existence without the intervention of reflection. Between the stimulus and your response is the ability to reflect, that is, to pivot, and to take account of, to consider, to behold, to regard, to care. So today I want to launch off into the psychonaut by, first of all, recalling pretty well what we ended on the last time, when we were talking about the expanded human nature, that is, your own cognostic constitution. What is it that you're constituted of? So what are we constituted of? Well, first of all, we're constituted of more than just the natural world. That is, all these finite things, whether you consider finite things as just physical, material occurrences, or you go to the subatomic level and you're willing to unfurl the dynamic interrelationships and exchanges that are occurring at a more refined, energetic, or if you will, etheric level, or you want to even extend finite events into your individual emotions and feelings, your particular thoughts and your thought streams and trains, and all the other finite things that occur on the inner scape as well as the outer scape can all be considered as part of the natural world. However, in your personal world, which is entirely private, that is where your inner reality is peeled from the outer existence, and you are no longer dealing in a finite world. You are dealing in a trans-finite world, and that is typically the human world, in which everything, in terms of its dualism, is perceived in duality. You already have duality. You are a subject perceiving an object. This is the epistemic relation. And the first result of that relation is the sensibility of I and me. I have my thoughts. I have my feelings. I have my behavior. I have my scope of action. I have. In other words, it's very possessive. It's private. It's personal. It's something that I perform internally, right? It's something that perdures. It lasts. It's something that's peculiar to me. Nobody else knows about it. But it's something that's also plethoric. That is, includes everything. I'm not leaving anything out in my consciousness, although I may articulate certain things. I may represent certain things. I may signify certain things. That's far different than the intuition I have of everything that occurs all at once. And this is something that, in terms of our cognostic constitution, we must realize in order to fully become human, that there are deeper aspects to us than just the finite realm. There's the entire transfinite realm. In religious terminology, this has been referred to as the kingdom of God. Because this is a kingdom in which divinity rules. And it is most important to see that besides the natural world, which is public, which is open to us all for observation and for comparison, because it's a metrical world. We can standardize some measurement. Doesn't matter whether it's metric or whether it's the Old English. It doesn't matter. As long as you've got a yardstick that's always maintained, a yardstick of gold that's always maintained, a meter, in the proper temperatures that is all agreed upon, everything is standardized, you have a standard by which you can meter out the rest of the world, and that's called Maya. Maya, mother, meter, measure, matter, material. It all means you chunk it up. You partition it off. But before that partition, there's purity. Nothing's partitioned off. That's infinite being. That's spiritual being. That's the spiritual world. This is the plenary world. This is the world that underlies everything. So even though I have these transfinite rays that are always extended in my sphere of consciousness from my single center, my reflective center, my epistic self, I have another anosic self, which is all at one in divinity, because that's the very thing from what my epistic self, my self-reflective psychical apparatus, is all composed of. That's its source. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the spiritual world, the infinite being. We've got other terms for that. That's been called the Dharmakaya in Buddhism. Christianity often refers to as the celestial realm, and then here, the terrestrial realm, which is the personal world, is here, but the Chthonian realm, below, the subliminal, the subconscious, the finite, all the finite that's fixated in these constellations that we always have. See, these constellations, whether they're phonemes or whether they're images or whether they're sentiments or whether they're resolutions, all of it has a formation and all of it retains a structure, even if it's subliminal, even if you're not paying attention to it. And you pull it up into your boat of consciousness from the lake of possibility of subliminal experience when you pivot. What is pivoting? Well, Pivoting is when you, as the point of consciousness, all of a sudden shoot your ray out to some aspect, to some object in the sphere of the world. That could be your innerscape, the world of your own psychic phenomena. Or it can be the outerscape, in which phenomena appear adventitiously on their own. Something that's being added. And this is where Sartre says, consciousness borrows being. What we're doing at that moment is we're pulling being into our conscious being. Pulling finite being into our conscious being, forever making it transfinite, our own stamp, if you will, upon the stream of consciousness. So our whole constitution, all the way from divinity through humanity down through animality, where we are creatures, that we share a finite world and have evolved, coincidentally with them, through productive causation. All of it's dependent upon the causation, though, as we spoke of, that is generative. That is this epistemic relation in which there's the object and the subject, which we stamp everything with. First and foremost is I and me. I'm the one that generates this me, this sense of who I am, what I believe, etc. That's all objective in my psychical world, you see. But in the physical world, that appears something that is inner. That's your innerscape. That's the within. Right? Even with a sphere, with a globe, you can't have a without a within, without something that is being contained in that container. And that's what we're dealing with here. The container called the constitution of humanness. In order to consider that constitution fully, we have to take into account what I've arranged as 9 levels, hierarchy, if you will, of needs and Newmans. Now, Abraham Maslow was well known for articulating the needs. That is all the way from the maintenance of nutrient sufficiency. That is your basic needs, to the safety needs, social needs, and your dignity needs, which includes your self-respect as well as the esteem, the social esteem. All of those he's well known for, and then of course his 5th of self-actualization. However, he does refer as well to higher levels of being cognition, as he puts it. As I put it, as conscious being. But as being cognition, there are also higher levels that tap into what is true to give you an authentic life. You see here, when you are personally maturing and you're beginning to actualize, that's when you really begin to realize life. That is, to make it real. You're consciously actualizing the things that you do. And in so doing that, automatically, you're quite aware that there's not only the serial, the linear causation that you're practicing in a finite world as an empirical ego, but coincidentally and in parallel, mind you, you are also an epistic self that has a transcendental ego that's able to step away from the finite world, distinguish itself from it, open up its own inner world, pivot toward it, expand it, cultivate it, integrate it with the finite experiences of the empiric self in order to have a truly integrated personality. If you will, it's a soul-infused personality in the sense that you have your transcendental ego, your soul, if you will, that is able to freely choose the finite events that it appears in its own episodes. So, very briefly, the entire panoply of needs and Newmans, now I call these upper, these in blue here, that these are actually numens. Now, what are numens? Numens are necessities to your spirit, to your consciousness. What does the necessity of consciousness entail? It means in order for you to fulfill what you already are as a form and a possibility, as a potency and as a tendency, you need to develop the higher aspects that emerge when you begin to actualize your full human potential. These things that begin to actualize, I call fluorescences, and they are, if you will, the fulfillment of your higher needs. Just as maintenance is the adequate fulfillment of your lower needs. So what are your lower needs? Well, we all have basic needs for sustenance and survival. That you have to find and feed, and that's your sufficient life. When you have met your basic needs, you have a sufficient life. When your safety needs are met, that is shelter and security, free from worry of being harmed and injured, then you have a secure life. The second of the needs have been met. In terms of maintaining ecological harmony, that is, really ecology, eco means your home, right? So your home includes not just the society of humans, but the society of creatures and plants and rocks and air and everything else. And so that's part of your larger social needs. Now, to be a truly social being, you have to accept your natural being as an animal that is embedded in the social context. So you have a sense of belongingness, right? A sense of place is in geography. A sense of belongingness is in terms of your social identity. So there you have the friendly life. So we have a sufficient, secure, and friendly life through meeting the first of the three needs. When it comes to the fourth of the needs of maintaining this social integrity, that social integrity not only exists between my interpersonal interaction in the finite world with other human beings, but my intrapersonal social consciousness, which we have said is one of the 10 dimensions of self, the social dimension, which we've also characterized as a very important dimension related to emotions. So here, in terms of dignity needs, once you have your own self-respect, and remember that's the difference between an individual who's conceited and prideful and one who truly has self-respect, is this: they do not depend for their sense of reward upon any exterior agency. If you have an autonomous sense of accomplishment, you have self-respect. If you don't, you have pride. You take pride when somebody says, well, you've done a good thing, you've done this, you've done that, because it's an external system of rewarding you for behavior you've done. Where if you've done it correctly, it's just like Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the reward of a thing well done is to have done it. You know it at the moment, and that's self-rewarding. That's not pride. Some people may mistakenly refer to it and say, well, I take pride in my work. Pride, like so many other terms, is flexible. Let's give it a good reading there. However, besides your internal sense of worth, self-worth, there is a sense of your worth within a larger community, and that's reflected back to you in the terms of feedback and appreciation, acknowledgments, recognitions, gratitudes of any and all forms. These are ways that the social environment comes back to you so that you end up with your dignity needs having a confident life. You're confident in your ability to maintain a balance between your own self-worth and the worth that is obviously reflected in the praise from those around you. Although you don't let your head, if you want to advance to the others, just like on all of these, you can focus on basic needs and then do nothing more the rest of your life than looking just to feed yourself and to find the appropriate kinds of survival tactics. You can get locked into any one of these needs. However, what we're talking about is an axial approach where you are moving upwards and never expanding. If you were, it's an ever-expanding spiral, right, as you're moving up the map of consciousness, this cognography, from physical through emotive, through metive, through egoic, through intuitive, through cognal, through aeonal, right, all the way up to the very top, all of it included. What we're looking for is an expansiveness. The higher you go, right, the deeper you fly. Or is it the higher you fly, the deeper you go? Whatever it is, in terms of your inner dimension, when you move to the inner world at that point, it feels as if you're soaring, as well as comprehending, taking in, expanding more of the omniverse in your own individual consciousness, and that's actually what's going on here. So in terms of a sentiency scale, you as a feeling human being, through these basic needs, once they're met, you're going to feel relief, satiation, right? When you feel satiated, fulfilled, and gratified. My basic needs are taken care of. All right. When you have safety needs, such as you've got a secure place to stay, and you've got security, freedom of worry from being harmed, at that point, you've got leisure, pleasure, satisfaction, repose. Another great accomplishment, another relief, another sense of feeling on this sentiency scale. As well, when you have social needs, you have a sense of felicity. That's just a sense of pleasantness when getting together with others and sharing and rejoicing. Very important word, rejoicing. You have sympathetic joy with others. You're glad for their successes. You don't have that schadenfreude. You don't look at somebody and go, oh, I'm glad that, they got what's coming to them. In the back of your mind. You free yourself from those things. All of this. What you are attempting to do is free yourself from the trammels of cis formations. That is, these afflictions and obstructions that continually have you cycling about, because it's a circle of least resistance. You don't have to do much. All you have to do is ride the carousel. It's already spinning. You're keeping it spinning. We'll go into that in a bit. So, what happens when you have your dignity met? Well, you have assurance, encouragement, and composure. Same thing happens now when you have self-actualization. That is, you envision your future and then you actualize it. You have a sense of exhilaration and happiness and contentment. This is where that self-worth of yours pays off in terms of an actual investment in you realizing your life. That is, taking full advantage of everything that you are at any given moment, however constricted. However constricted, it's still there. Right? It's still there. All you are going to do is expand the vibration. Excuse me. As Paramahansa Yogananda said, whether I am a small or I am a big wave of being, the same ocean of life is beneath me. This is the kind of consciousness that takes you from contraction to expansion. because you realize that the very being of your conscious being is already part of that plenary being, the larger being, the outer scape, inner scape, and the greater scape. It's part of that greater scape. And up here, we're dealing with the greater scape. Enlightenment, ecstasis, eudaimonia, and enosis, which in a word, let us look at it as the true, the beautiful, the good, and the one. We are moving up in terms of our fluorescences. We have interactive authenticity. That is, when no matter where we are, we're being authentic. You're not living under guises. You're using, remember, your adaptive personae. Remember, we were speaking of this the last time very quickly. The adaptive personae of the orchestral personality, that is your empirical interfacing with the finite world. You have all these different personae that you are going to use in order to specifically interact, in order to achieve not only your ends, but the higher ends of all concerned. And so what's going to happen is, just as in self-actualization, you were leading the realizing life. Once you begin to move into the true, you are going to have astonishment, marvel, wonder, amazement. There is going to be this koinonia that will constantly be occurring, in which you stand transfixed before the beauty, that is the symmetry, that impacts you in the symmetry of subject and object. There is a perfect syzygy there. There is already a pre-established harmony. There is already a relation. And that relation presupposes unition. Monition. What is unition? It is where a unit, an entity, is what it is because of the process of being a unit, a single thing, an aeon. What is monition? Monition is that very unit unfolding in the space, time, entity, causality network we call the continuum. Samsara, the finite world, all of it interdependent in itself. We are interjecting ourselves all the time as transfinite beings in a finite world. We are part of it, right? We are in it, but we are not of it. We are capable of extracting ourselves as transcendental egos at any given moment and pivoting, whether to the outer world, the inner world, or the greater world. So, and that's what you're doing here. You're pivoting. And through astonishment and marvel, you achieve an understanding, a discernment of where you are in terms of your enlightened perspective on the world. And as you fluoresce in the inner subjective felicity, where you feel the joy that is ever present and all prevailing, which is part of the very fabric of psychical being, because there the principle of felicity holds sway. We're here in the world of the finite, thoughts, feelings, and actions, deeds, interactions, subatomic or terrestrial level, doesn't matter what level. If it's finite, it's always subject to the principle of utility. Where if it's relational, and it is this generational causation, where there is this synthesis, interrelationship, you can't have one relation with all the relations all at once. They're all in harmony. That's felicity. That's bliss. That's something you tune into in your own psychic nature by pivoting your consciousness to the more positive dynamisms in life, of which all these fluorescences are actualizations of. So in the same way that in terms of enlightenment, when you are developing the authentic life, the truly happy life begins when you have a sense of this intersubjective felicity, where you are at one. Intersubjectively, it doesn't matter what the creature is. If they have sentience, intelligence, vivacience, and conscience, they have existence. And if they have existence, they have something that they share with you and I. So consequently, you'll be having a lot of rapture as you awaken into this ecstatic realm with joy and bliss and creativity and compassion. You feel with. That's the idea of intersubjective felicity. When we move to the next level, you'll notice these, the true, the beautiful, and the good. That's Platonism. You'll notice that when we move to the level of the good, which really, this has to do with will, and this has to do, of course, with love, and this has to do with mind. So mind and heart are love and will. And then, of course, it all gets combined together in the one life. But however, the good life is characterized by peace and imperturbability. It's the most tranquil state that one could operate from because they maintain a balance as they pivot within the spinning world. It's all about balance. You have 4 postures, right? You can sit, you can stand, you can walk, or you can lie down. But there's a 5th, and it's the moving posture. And that can be a painter, that can be a writer, and they're sitting, but they're still moving. It can be a dancer or a ballet star who's spinning through the air. It can be an athlete performing their sport. But it doesn't matter whether you are sitting, whether you are lying, whether you are standing, walking, or moving, you are dancing. You're maintaining your balance. You're creating jazz, the notes on the scale of existence as it churns in the vortex of being. You are quite able to understand that balance or dancing occurs at all 5 levels, right? All 5 levels. First of all, balance happens when you're sitting, of course, because you've suspended ambulation. That is one of your karma indriyas. Moving, walking. I'm not going to circumambulate as I'm sitting. I'm not going to walk about. So, the upper part, torso, head, that's where the focus happens. That's where people, of course, sit at conference tables. That's where painters sit at easels. That's where programmers have their counsel before them. You see, this is where you focus the higher energies automatically when you're sitting. That's why you use sitting for meditation. And of course, then you close down the senses through pratyahara, through sense withdrawal, so that you focus on the inner world. But that's what happens with the psychonaut. With the psychonaut, we're all the fool. The tarot cards, first card, 0. That's the fool. Begins from 0, the point. The point is a finite. It is not finite, transfinite, infinite. It's a finite. It's not a question of being everywhere and anywhere. That's a finite question. That's like asking, is there something or nothing? What are you talking about? There's both. You couldn't have something without nothing. You can't have being without not being. Anyway, we had that discussion. So, with the good, you're finding that loving kindness is the way that you're interacting with things because that's the way things are. That's what fits things together. That's what adjusts things with one another, right? Because every time that you're arriving anywhere, you have to readjust, but you also have to de-adjust. And so you're always in motion, and this is always a dance. Even when you're lying down to sleep, if you're affected by too much alcohol or by some debilitating physiological or neural condition where things keep spinning while you're laying down and you just can't fall asleep because of a spinning room, well, you get the idea there that things are not in balance. Everything is spinning. However, the ideal posture is lying down in order to sleep. That's where your somnambulant consciousness automatically takes over and the body relaxes most of its interactive sensors, the passive and the active, and automatically de-externalizes and re-internalizes, right? There's that readjustment and there's that de-adjustment that's going on at the same time when you arrive at the state of consciousness called sleep. But in every motion, and even in walking, this is the prototypical case. In walking, you are always losing and regaining your balance. That's what balance is. It's always losing. It's de-adjusting from one spot and readjusting to another. And it's maintaining that continuity through the discontinuity of finite actions. That's the marvelous thing we call play, Leela. That's the dance of Shiva. The dance of Shiva is where everything is maintaining its balance in the world. And that, of course, leads us to the perspective of the one and the one life. And that is the next stage. That's the seventh and final intuitional idea of self. And that pristine idea is the self is the Adip. What is the Adip? The Adip is the one who has mastered existence. What is mastery of existence? We will deal with that in our next episode. However, for now, important to understand that all of these 9 needs and numens are together part of anthropic axiality. It's what makes us human. And I referred to these. In terms of the phase, growing up, waking up, lifting up, and giving up. Those are the 4 phases we all go through in terms of our transfinite existence. Now, our transfinite existence, as you can well understand, is not your finite existence. You may have one life, another life, and that may be lived in this life. You will have one moment, another moment, and that could be in this life. It's all a sense of what at the given moment is the new crux. What is the new crux? It means that in this very moment, there is a birthing, there is an abiding, there is an aging, and there is a dying. There's always, when you are arriving somewhere, in terms of a passage, you are always abandoning something and attaining something else. That is the dance. That is the ontological balance that must be maintained by a conscious being in order for them, as a psychonaut, to evolve. As a cybernaut, you are developing, you are maturing, you are approaching becoming human. To become human is to become a mind of light. That is to turn on the light bulb and be aware of it. And that's waking up. You've arrived. And at that point, you begin your cognostic unfoldment. In the same way, you had your psychophysical unfoldment as you grow, all the way from the embryo, fetus to embryo, all the way up, into where eventually you became an adult. That is, you stopped growing automatically in terms of psychophysical development. Not that you couldn't become athletic, not that you couldn't become skilled, because of course you do, and those are part of your defining characteristics. But when you wake up, at that point, there's cognostic unfoldment, and you begin to fuse the various aspects of your being, and not simply to integrate certain finite aspects so that they have survival value, or they work to fulfill one of the other basic needs we spoke of under the principle of utility. Instead, the principle of felicity has taken place, and there's a full-grown joy in what is being done for the fact of just doing it. It is automatically enabling you to release hidden powers that no longer are mere potentials. When you eventually have unfolded yourself in the palace of your own understanding, you are able then to lift up and to contribute. At that point, you are abiding in that state. You are no longer simply approaching or arriving. You are now abiding constantly. It's no longer simply a phase. It is now a permanent state. It is something which is durable, and it's perdurant in your own transfinite consciousness. Because of unification, that is where your individual abilities that have been fused at the psychical level now are interfused at a higher level, at the greater level, where the principle of unity operates in that spiritual world we spoke of, which encompasses the personal world and the natural world. And this leads, of course, eventually to gifting. That is, abdicating. You freely give up all the finite things you have because of the treasure of transfinity that you've achieved. At that point, you're operating under the principle of perfectibility. You are no longer simply looking to unify yourself with the whole. You are unified with the whole. And now, the whole is moving to perfect itself with all things. It doesn't matter whether it's this universe or whether it's part of the multi-universe. It still, recall, is something which is part of the paraverse that shall never be exhausted. So there's an axial path of self-evolution. And this is experience. And let's begin with experiencing. That's what's going on right here. I'm experiencing what? I'm experiencing the experienced. That is, this is all the experienced. This is all the encounter that's taking place here. But in my inner life, I have experiencing, which is paralleled with the engagement of my life with you, the endowment I have from will and capacity and virtue to be able to be empowered to speak, to be enabled, to physically have the health, to be able to speak, to be endowed with mental capacities that have been cultivated for years that allow me the clear ability to articulate. And so it goes. With the mind, there's entrainment at the moment, there's experiencing and engagement and endowment and entertainment. And entertainment, remember, is something that exists between. It is not something that exists on its own. The subject does not exist on its own. When any of us are experiencing, we are automatically entertaining and we are entertained. This is entertainment. We are part and parcel of the essences that are entified here. And we are all entertained. If we are not actively entertaining and experiencing, then what we are doing is at the subliminal level, we have an expectance. We fix the way that our experience, we think, will happen, should happen, and must happen. And with this fixation, these cis formations, these locking in to this expectance of self as it unfolds, this limitation and constriction of self, is enchantment of the mind. It's estrangement of love and of the heart. It's enslavement of the body or your life. And it's enfeeblement of the will. All of that is expectance. Expectance is enfeeblement of the will, enchantment of the mind, estrangement of the heart, and enslavement of the body. These are the things that constrict you, I, any of us, as minds of light, as humans, from using that natural radiatory light in order to expand into the greater scape via our inner scape. In the axial path of self-evolution, what we are looking to achieve through all our experiencing, breaking past our expectance, is eudaimonia, happiness. Happiness is the integration of what? An enlightening mind. Yes, absolutely. An endearing heart, an emancipating life, and an empowering will. That's eudaimonia, that's happiness, that is the expansive enossic self, which each of us is in terms of our cognostic constitution. In this axial path of self-evolution, we've broken down here exactly what it is that experiencing is, and we speak of the self-transformations of the enossic self. And this I was just listing here. And quite clearly, we begin with enosis and eudaimonia, enosis and eudaimonia and evolution. These are all aspects of axial development achievement, from the constricted state to the expansive state. And as I said, very often, as one rises, one feels a sense of soaring through the sky of consciousness. This is a natural occurrence for the psychonaut as they become the Kalinaut, K-A-L-I, not. They move to Mount Kali. They move up the mountaintop and no longer are bound just by their psychical apparatus and understanding, but they move into the larger pneumatic, spiritual grounding, the great spirit of which grounds everything. So we're talking about axial growth, and we're talking about self-transformation that takes place. This unified state of enosis is, with eudaimonia and evolution, part of this axial achievement, the axis of identity. Your identity grows to be more than just the empirical ego or the transcendental ego. It becomes the transcendent ego. It becomes an ego that, if you will, is aeonic. It sees itself through that second of the intuitional ideas as the aeon. In terms of the evolutionary modes, the achievement, therefore, of enosis, eudaimonia, evolution with endearment, emancipation, empowerment, and enlightenment, all of those are self-transformations of the enossic self, which we all fundamentally are. Now, self-formations of the epistemic self we've covered. That's the experiencer, the experiencing, and the experienced, as well as the entrainment, entertainment, engagement, and endowment. That's all going on here and now, right? But if you're locked in to the here and now so that it impedes the next moment as an obscuration or as an affliction, then that's expectance. And that is characterized by enslavement, estrangement, enfeeblement, and enchantment. And you see here, it's based upon, expectance is based upon the enthrallment. That is the enthrallment of the transcendent, or the transcendent ego, with its participation and involvement with the transfinite and the finite worlds. That's its enthrallment. And down here, at this level where we're all involved in the macrocosm we know as the universe, we're all entangled, deeply interconnected. And in that interconnection, we find our net of nescience, that is ignorance. And ignorance is the primary delusion by which expectance operates. And so if we're ever going to break free of the limitations of the empirical ego and the empiric self and its finite constitution as the personality of my thoughts and my wills and my desires and all the finite things that I've arranged that I can put a finger on. If I can put a finger on it, if I can identify it by way of a term, or identify it by way of an image, or by way of a feeling, or touch it in any other way, if I can pivot toward its finite, that's part of the empirical ego. That's part of the empiric self, that whole bundle of self that's involved in the finite world. Now, the bundle of yourself that's involved within the transfinite world, that's your psychical being. And that's all the inner thoughts and feelings and the other things that you have that are all phased and sedimented, stitched together along a stream of consciousness, a never-ending thread of consciousness, if you will, or an always unfurling center of consciousness, which I prefer. Anyway, you're caught in this deep net of nescience. We all are. And it's a matter of not circling around within that net and reinforcing that net if you want to be happy. You can be satisfied on this plane. You can attain your own personal, limited, finite ends. And that's well, all and fine. But eventually there's a deep craving. Because we're not all just a single cognos, a mind, an individual conscious being, but we're an individual conscious being that strives, that grows, that unfolds, that achieves, that fluoresces, that opens like a flower. And that is where true felicity is at. It isn't the attainment of some material, definable, finite end. It's living in the endless transfinity, which is the wellspring of your own conscious being. And so, how do you get to that point? How do we get to that point? Across the globe, people are waking up every day. This is a natural phenomenon as we break past the bonds of cis formation, which once again, I'm going to say, that is part of all of our being, and it is something which is our constricted nature. Moving past these cis formations allows us to expand. So we want to move past expectance, which means we've got to get past enchantment and estrangement, enslavement and enfeeblement. To do that, let's understand what are the cyclic stories of existence. Well, when it comes to time, we break the segments up into spans. When it comes to space, we break it up into sections. We see sections at a time. These are structured elements situated in space. When it comes to feeling, the feeling dimension, the heart, we break things up in terms of scenes. We see things as gestalts. That is, they're shaped essences related as entities. When it comes to life, doing, things happen in a series. There's a sinuous energies that are concatenated through causality. So we have causality, time, space, and entities. And those, as we spoke of, are the four senses of self, the conchukas, as they're called, within Kashmiri Shaivism. And these are the filters, right? That's the way you filter the world. You see the world either as broken up into a series of causes and effects, as sections of space, as spans of time, right? Or as scenes. This is a groovy scene. This is a dreadful scene. This is a beautiful scene. We paint it with the essences of our mind. But as I mentioned, all the painting that we do, all the existential dramatization that we exteriorize and that we interiorize in our imaginations and our feelings, should really be looked upon as a kind of top. We're all a top of consciousness, and we're attaining axial equilibrium of our trigonic self. So here's the labyrinth of Lethe. This is our waking consciousness. These are our 5 mindful states, and those 5 mindful states we'll get into later on. Basically, they are your disturbed state. You're either disturbed basically in your waking consciousness, or you're somnolent, that is you're lazy, you're tired and torpid, or you're distracted, that is your mind is occupied with something, whether work or internal dialogue, chatter, reimagining. That's the majority of where most of us spend our life, not in the disturbed or the somnolent state, but very much in the distracted state. And then the 4th state is one-pointed. That is, quite literally, where you center yourself reflectively and you are able, between that stimulus and response, to have that whole arena of reflection in which your response is nowhere near as predetermined as people might want you to believe that it is. So, when we're talking about here, these mindful states, the last one is controlled. It's mastery of all your states of consciousness, because you're one-pointed. You can pivot anywhere. You can accomplish anything. You can cultivate anything that you choose to cultivate. Now, those are the encounters we have at the physical. Here we have the emotive level, which are characterized by our affective fancies, which I call fantasies, and then on the mental level, and you'll notice here, this is the cognography, right, of human existence, all the way from the physical, all the way up to the aeonal. And I've even included the paraversal. So here we go. Physical, emotive, mentive. You've got your encounters or your fugue states. We all remember certain things from any encounter that we have. At the end of the day, you should do a self-review just as a matter of psychological hygiene, and take a look upon your day, observe it, review it. You're going to find most of your states are fugue states. You don't remember them. Most of what you did is conceal from yourself what was really happening so that you could reveal the appropriate response, your presentation, your performance, the manifestation in this concrete world. So these encounters, actually fugues, are your personal episodes that may look like external events to a third-party observer, but to you, they're an episode. They're an event that's happening with you in it. All right. On the emotive level, a finer grade of energy than the mere physical, past the subatomic, past the quarks. On the emotive level, this is where we have our fantasies. All of this I like to characterize as a maze of mirrors. We're dreaming. Whether it's your fantasies on the emotive level or your fables, that is your concrete mental fabrications on the mentive level, it's all dreaming. They're all things that you keep replaying over and over and over again as part of your transfinite inner experience. And these mental fabrications are based on these abstract mental formations which you have in the form of deep beliefs. And these are, if you will, the abstract dimensions in which you create these concrete fables. And for instance, if you believe you're a Christian, then the fiction that you're using or the abstract mental formation is the Christian doctrine, the incarnation of the Christ, resurrection, etc., etc. And all of that you will picture in one way or another in your mind as fables. Jesus is either wearing a tunic or a disrobe or gown that way, certain complexion, certain hairstyle, maybe beard, maybe not, usually with. These are all kinds of things that we pass on, right? We pass on, and we'll deal with how we pass those on. But anyway, here on the egoic level, there are, first of all, those fictions, those basic formations, those prototypes from which we derive all the concrete images of our beliefs. And we have filters, which are these empirical senses I've already referred to as the entital, the causal, the spatial, and the temporal senses, these conjuncas. And then there are the forces, that is your epistemic capacities. And your capacity as a psychological being basically is that you can do things, you have praxis, you can theorize about things, that is, you have a mental wherewithal, as well as you have a creative ability, a poiesis, if you will, automatic wellspring of creative wealth that comes from the will. That's the basis of your virtue. And then you have orexis. You have a network of desires and preferences that you have at a deep, high psychological level that influences the way that you will do your feeling, in the same way that the way you theorize influences how you do your thinking, and the way that your praxis is formed, that is your tendency to certain actions, is going to pre-formulate the way that your behavior is eventually going to be cast in the die of deeds. As we move up into the intuitive realm, where your spiritual faculties and intuitive senses are together in a nexus of utopia with your freedoms, which are these cognal or atmic freedoms that you have as a fully intentionalized human being. That is, where you not only have a subtension where you're always aware of yourself, that's apperception, but you have an intention, subject and object, and you have a protension from the past to the present, from the present to the future. You protend something, you retend something from the past to the present. So at the same time that I'm protending to the future, I'm retending from the past, I'm extending out into space, I am intending internally as subject-object. These are all intentionalities, and they exist at this level that we call the greater scape. Share that with all entities, with all sentient, intelligent, vivacious, and conscient beings. And what grounds that all are the foundations, the hypostases. There are 5 hypostases of self: intuiting, thinking, feeling, doing, and willing. Those 5. That constitutes the web of life. When that's fully realized and cultivated, you experience eudaimonia. When the nexus of nobility is tapped within any of our waking states, particularly through yogic applications, that's experience of contemplation. We all experience the net of nescience and the path to sapience during our deep sleep in the same way that our dreaming in our maze of mirrors occurs in the quotidian level here, in our everyday consciousness, in our stupefied cybernautical existence, as well as in our sleep states, right? Waking, dreaming, deep sleeping. We cycle through those states. But we also go into a deep, dreamless, deeper than deep state, a state of contemplation, where every night we tap in to what we are when we're lying supinely, or we're reclining on our side, however we're sleeping. Some sleep sitting up. However you practice sleeping, you touch, at some point, a deep, dreamless state. What you do in meditation is you touch that state consciously. So in terms of maintaining our psychonautical balance in our dance of life as existential beings, I'm moving to the next cogno card here, and I want to bring in that when we're in the world of fantasies, we're in our house of dreams. When we're in the world of fables, we're in the house of dogma, our hall of dogma. We're going down a hall, the dogmatic pictures are hung up, and as little kids, we're taught what those pictures mean. And I want to focus on the maze of mirrors today because that is most instrumental so that you don't swoon as you spin in samsara, so that you are able to pivot to the center where you find equilibrium, and you find the axial equilibrium in the spinning top of consciousness. So I'm going to take all of this entire spinning top, the spinning top of your own individual consciousness, and we're going to see that here in the land of the life world, there's the house of dreams, the hall of dogma, the dome of doxa. What is doxa? Beliefs, the deep beliefs that are passed on. The crystal citadel, the pivotal palace where your consciousness will turn in order to walk into the city of life, and there eventually expand throughout the domain of divinity into the plenum of impletion. Impletion is the impossibility for the source ever to be depleted. Impletion is an ever filling up. Impletion is that the moment it appears that something is being taken out from the reservoir or the source or being, it is already pre-filled, past fulfillment, possible fulfillment. That's the concept of impletion. It's the ever-renewing wellspring we know as the fountain in the web of life, in the whole thing, the cosmos of the universe, the omniverse, pardon me, that includes our universe, the multiverse, plus the paraverse. So I've broken the balance down. All right, here we have the top only from the epistic level on down. Let's look at trying to maintain the balance. Here's the line of equilibrium, which is, of course, your center line of identity. And here I have a horizontal bar, which represents a moving cross. It's where you are going to place your consciousness at any moment. And for the time being, on this carousel of consciousness, I've placed it here right in the maze of mirrors where I want us to focus and where I want to take my consciousness along with yours into the house of dreams and hall of dogma. So from this land of the life world in which now you and I are interacting, and such as it is, we're going to move into the innerscape. And here, in this innerscape, I want to scrutinize the maze arrangements of the inner carousel. I want to look at two basic things going on. The fables here, all right, and the fantasies here. That's all. Let's look at fables and fantasies. So we're going to move into the 5 carouseling states of fantasy and then the 5 carouseling states of fable. So when it comes to our imaginations and our affections on the imaginal level, on the emotive level, we're always hitting the replay button. Our carousel of consciousness is going around in such a fashion that in terms of our inner images, there is always this sense of recycling that takes place of interior images. Is it not so? We're always hitting that replay button, and we're going to one of 4 places. If you're going into the place of mind, mainly, you ruminate. There's rumination. You're always chattering about something. There's this incessant inner dialogue that's taking place. You're ruminating about this, or what you're going to have for lunch, or where you're going to go, or how you'll arrange your day. Rumination of the mind. But there's also reverie of feelings that takes place. The reverie of the heart is such that it gets captured, enchanted, if you will, with the images of those experiences that have been pleasurable before, and you walk into an imageal reverie, these fantasies, these wonderful reapplications of joyous past experiences. And we also have in this maze of mirrors of ours, we also have rehearsal. We're all adept at rehearsing how it is that we're going to interact with a particular person under particular circumstances. Athletes rehearse their performances through their imagination prior to their actual physical engagements and maneuverings. And we have, in terms of the will, of course, rehearsal is when you're dramatically doing it, and that relates to the life sense, just as reverie relates to the heart, rumination to the mind, and re-imaging. We all have the capacity to sit down and go, okay, let me envision how this should be. Let me re-image how this business should work. Let me re-image the process for attaining perfection of a craft. We do this constantly. We re-image things, and it's a bit more on the conscious level because, of course, it involves the will. Now, if we were to shift our cross here and move it up into the 5 carouseling states of fable, we're going to see that right in the center, I place auguries and oracles. Auguries are when you read things into the external world. You see something and you go, oh, okay, well, that means that it's going to be a bad day for me. Or you look at the clouds and they have a certain formation and you're reading something into it. If you're reading something into it, that's an augury. And in that way, you're creating a fable. There's no guarantee anything's going to happen. It's just a concrete fable that's taking place within your mentive environment. Now, if on the other hand, somebody comes to you with an oracle, they're going to say, whether they threw the tarot deck or the I Ching, or whether they just happen to see it within the tea leaves of the thread of events that are unfolding before them, they'll look and they'll say, well, listen, you know, I predict, or I think this is going to happen. Well, that's an oracle. So it's them reading into something for you. All right, these are all fables. And basically what happens is when you're in the hall of dogma, your elders give you oracles all the time. They gave you oracles from the time that you were born. You are walked down this hall of dogma with all these pictures of religion and science and being a working person and achieving something in life and being dignified and what it means to be satisfied and how to dress well, all of it. It's all hanging on the walls. And you go down the hall of dogma and your elders oraculate for you. They tell you what this picture means. And then, of course, you believe that fable. And so that becomes part in that dome of dots that we were talking about later. That is under that big dome as you walk down these various hallways of belief. So, what are the others? Well, when it comes to your mind, you tell tales. This is how this went, this is how that went. You tell stories. You thread them together with a leitmotif or with a theme. You have myths and legends. Myths are, if you will, they're the prototypes that we live by, such as the myth of capitalism, where you believe that true capital is all that there is in the world of value. Well, of course not. There's capital, right, which you agree on as any outside worth. Ancient tribal configurations for economic well-being included exchanges of shells for money, for capital, right, for building up wealth on the physical plane. But then there's talent. There are those inner treasures of your psyche, of your epistic self, that are intrinsically worthy, much more so even in most eyes than capital. There's capital, there's talent, and then there's genius. There's the way that you can uniquely apply that talent for the cosmic whole that benefits it through a direct contribution that only you uniquely can give through, of course, the orchestra of your personae. So, in terms of legends, you're looking at the past and you're interpreting and saying, well, this was truly a heroic woman or man. Icons and exemplars. Are you using the present dramatic scene in order to say, well, you know that, the rock stars, celebrities, movie stars, they all become icons in some way or another. Or perhaps there are exemplars, people who do things perfectly, such as we all see them. They're the people that have the particular skills and they act professionally either as a business person, as an artist, as a priest, as a surfer. It doesn't matter. They serve as a model, as an example of how to do something well. So anyway, psychonautical balance includes scrutinizing these maze arrangements and understanding exactly what's going on here. So pictorially, let's just look at visualizing the maze, right? I already referred to the above here. In terms of the Hall of Dogma, you're walking down what your elders and your teachers and the authorities are going to walk you down in your first phase of development, psychophysical development, in your maturation phase, right? You're growing up. You're going to wake up from all of this at some point because this is convention-clad, it's enculturated, it's ideologically socialized party membership. It's dogmatic, it's ideology-bound beliefs. It's a hierarchy-fixed follower, true believer. It's a fable teller. You're indoctrinated, hypnotized. You have a frozen vista of dogma that has been passed to you through the hierarchical gauntlet of beliefs. This is part of the maze of mirrors. That's the mentive part. Deep in your feelings of the emotive sphere is the haunted mansion of moods. This haunted mansion of moods is an ever-shifting, as we said. You hit that replay button, and you're going to some room or another here. You're going to have reverie, right? You're going to ruminate in this room. You're going to replay past events and rehearse future ones in that room. You're going to meet with other people through your social dimension in this room and perhaps reimagine your future. But regardless of where you are in the haunted mansion, you're a sleepwalker. Your spin-weary swooning will demand rest and respite. You will enter into daydreaming, as we all do, or as it's called, wool gathering. It's absent-minded lounging, if you will, throughout this house of dreams. You're a fantasy islander. You need emotive relief and affective respite. You're prone to phantasmal lingering. Phantasmal lingering. That's when you're being cited for just being a lounge being of the affective world. You love the dreamscape of your own inner fancies. So this is socially sedimented and acculturated, as we'd say. And it's basically the world of mesmerism, inner mesmerism. Husserl, Edmund Husserl, in his phenomenology, refers to this state of consciousness in the house of dreams as where the free variation of fantasy roams. That's where you're able to freely change any image that you would like. Well, we need to break free of all of this if we're actually going to attain balance and no longer keep cycling about. So in order to do that, I want you to see that I have two things superimposed here upon this spiraling to the top of consciousness. The first is this elongated pyramid, where the base at the bottom, the very grounding that you're going to use in order to ascend, that is where you are at right now, right here and now, in the space-time cause and entity continuum. And you're going to move up all the way toward the point. You're going to pivot. And each of these pivotings, these micro moments where you pivot toward this top, is paradoxically going to expand your consciousness, not contract it. You're going to focus toward the apex. You are going to expand throughout the vortex. That's what these two dual movements are representing. The solidity, if you will, of your apexal evolution, and the fluidity of the spiral of micro moments that are going to constitute the pivots that you take in order to awaken the Newmans. The whole process of awakening is happening across the globe at an increased level for a number of reasons, including the development not only of outer frictional heat and the development, if you will, of the telecommunicational neural network that is integrating the Occident and the Orient into Jaya, into a single interconnected globe. It's not only that external friction and heat that's occurring, but it's the internal light, which is radiating, being generated by that second type of causation we spoke of as generation. The process of self-transformation occurs there in generation. And the self-realization and the self-cultivation will lead to self-transformation, which of course is the empowering will, the enlightening mind, the endearing love, and the emancipating acts or life. You will use 13 types of intelligence besides your general intelligence in order to achieve your Newmans and your needs. These 13 types of intelligence are visual, musical, linguistic, logical, mathematical, mechanical, kinesthetic, naturalistic, existential, like life smart, interpersonal, people smart, intrapersonal, that's your self smart, you know about your 10 dimensions, you know about your inner states, transpersonal, that is cosmic smart. You're a big picture thinker, BPT, big picture thinker. And then personal, that's your integral smart. That's where you use any of these in any fashion that you choose to make the particular kind of special intelligence that allows you, once again, to use the adaptive personae of the orchestral personality. Right? Your personality is held together by various personae. We dealt with that the last time. And this is the way that these personae are amalgamated. And they're amalgamated into spiral sagas of eudaimonia, in where by deliberate willing, you're going to build dignity, which is your accomplished sovereignty. And by mindful thinking, you will be generating discernment, which is your integral sagacity. Appreciative feeling. You'll notice that deliberate, mindful, appreciative, focused, they're all things that are happening here now as part of your experiencing, as part of you pivoting and creating this spiral as a saga in the unfoldment of your human existence. So appreciative feeling is going to yield delight, and that's the blissful serenity that comes along with that. Focus active, that causes dynamis. What is dynamis? It's competent service. It's where you have not only the ability, but the vivacity and the vitality to serve others. And others includes not only humans, but all others that you are going to grant empowerment, enlightenment, endearment, and emancipation through your own happiness, your own eudaimonia. So your awakening consciousness is, I am conscious of being conscious. That's the awakening mantra. That linguistic tool is just a tool, but it allows you to enter the interscape. Now, we have to understand something most important. Everyone gets invited to the innerscape. It's a gift. You're reminded of your innerscape by somebody who's already there. That's just the nature of how innerscape works. It's reflexive. And once it happens, and that innerscape opens up, then you feel free to be who you are. Most of us shun away from our innerscape, from our internal psyche, from our soul, from our self-consciousness. We don't want reflective consciousness. We do things to shun it. That's why we're distracted, right? That's why we're somnolent. That's why we're torpid in our thoughts. That's why we're even willing to be disturbed, because it takes us away from our center. We no longer then are reflecting on ourselves. We no longer are giving ourselves the chance to remain in balance between the stimulus and our response. But when you are conscious of being conscious, then you are reflective, and you immediately use your intuition, your intrinsic apperception, in order to see what you're doing with your will and your mind and your feelings and your doings. That inner world that opens up is a world that one is invited to. That's why in the religious figures, you will always have them saying, they'll always want you to enter a door. They'll always want you to enter a kingdom of heaven. They'll always want you to enter an abode of bliss. It's because you are being invited to your inner self. Because preoccupation with the outer world has meant that your outer self has been forfeited to this world. It's been dedicated and invested to the demands of this outer world, to these finite encroachments. They transfix us. But when you see these encroachments as encounters, then you realize that they are opportunities for your innerscape to shine in the outerscape. And that reflective consciousness, that shining outwards, is deliberate, willing, mindful thinking, appreciative feeling, and focused doing or acting. Over the centuries, humankind has developed various margas or paths to consciously attain the states of eudaimonia. To attain eudaimonia, you practice what's called Vajrayana, the 7 factors to enlightenment. You practice Raja Yoga, the kingly yoga, which puts all 8 limbs of yoga at your disposal. When it comes to the mind, enlightenment is attained by yogic specialists called jnana yogis, philosophers amongst them, to develop viveka, discrimination. Just like bhakti yogis use feeling and the heart to establish endearment through vairagya. Vairagya is when you are dispassionate toward the finite and you are passionate toward the infinite. Emancipation is achieved through various forms of Laya yoga. And here I'm including Kundalini yoga, Kriya yoga, and all the other advanced forms of yoga, Tantra yoga, that are utilizing the subtle winds and the chakras and the nadis and the various etheric constitutionalization and imaginary pathways or imageal pathways by which energy is interconnected with the physical body. And this is abhyasa, this is constant practice, this we all must do, just like we all must have sankalpa, which is your deliberate willing, which is your intentionality and resolve to do what must be done. And this is Agni Yoga, the yoga of will. So, Raja, Agni, Jnana, Bhakti, and Laya Yoga, they all contribute to vibhuti, that is the revelation, the unconcealment, if you will, of the noumenal world as fluorescences to evolve this world, and that's very practical yoga. That's karma yoga. Binding it all together is Anuttara Tantra Yoga, and that is the highest yoga tantra. That is the tantra of ekatva, of union, enosis. That is the tantra that binds all together in one synergic yogic enterprise. But together they constitute the 7 paths of expanded consciousness, and anyone who is consciously undertaking self-transformation will utilize one, usually, maybe a couple complementary paths in order to attain what they're doing. Now, the most important thing for breaking out of the carousel, stop the swooning and the spinning of the maze of samsara, is to pivot your consciousness to self-composure. And for this mantra, let's use the pivoting mantra. I pivot to the secret treasures of my inner consciousness. Pivot to the secret treasures of your inner consciousness. Your deliberate willing will pivot to confidence. Your mindful thinking pivots you to clarity. Your appreciative feeling pivots you to compassion. And focus acting pivots to contribution in this world. Altogether, reflective consciousness itself pivots to self-composure. Your self-composure are these things, 4 things: the confidence, the clarity, the compassion, and the contribution. Now, I'd like to distill these just into a couple of thoughts, a couple of phrasal thoughts. When you are practicing deliberate willing, what is that? What are you doing? Well, it's to regard. When you're thinking of something mindfully, that's to consider. It's not to deliberate for one side or the other, it's to clearly consider. It's to be unbiased. Just like to regard is to open up to the potential dignity of someone else. An appreciative feeling, it pivots to compassion. That's to behold. When you actually appreciate something, you're caught in astonishment, amazement. You behold it. You see it in a way you didn't see it before. Some of its essential beauty now is reflected back to you. And in the same regard, your focus acting is to give. You can't act without giving. You're going to give of yourself one way or another. All of these end in rejoicing. And I spell rejoice in the old-fashioned way here, because when you regard and consider, when you behold and you give, you are actually rejoicing at that moment. There is joy that is occurring as a natural part of your experiencing. One could say, part of your experiential being is joy, and you are rejoicing because you are reflecting. It isn't just a natural joy, it's a personal joy. It's one that you brought to the liminal surface of your consciousness. And that fosters love. When you are rejoicing, you are naturally in love with every element of yourself and every element of the universe. And you may notice here that I take the great sage Erich Fromm's ideas and I say, love are these 4 things. It's care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge in Fromm's terms. When you regard something, you will learn to respond to it. You will have the ability to respond. Between the stimulus and between the response, you are going to develop responsibility, the ability to respond. When you consider something, you are going to foster knowledge. In the same way, when you behold someone as they are, or some creature as they are, or some sunset, or flower as they are. When you behold that, then you foster respect. And when you give, you foster care. Actual, concrete care. Not this abstract feeling where you say, oh, I really do care. No, no, no. If you care physically. You touch. You transact. You give. This is the pivoting consciousness. I pivot to the secret treasures of my inner consciousness. And you pivot by regard, considering, beholding, and giving. Thusly do we rejoice in the gardens of self-cultivation with their fruits. Because happiness is constituted with our empowering will that gives us the virtue and the character, which, if you will, is the tensile strength of eternity in the here and now. Wisdom and insight are the results of an enlightening mind, and just as endearing love leads to serenity and to bliss. Emancipating life, in which life is fully engaged, utilizes skills and brings about power for oneself and others. So the 5 contributions of awakening consciousness to the world are basically utilizing your axiomatic sense, your sense of self-evidencing conscious identity. That is your axiomatic sense. It's not axioms in the mathematical or logical sense. It's axiomatic in the sense of being axial and being self-evidencing. And you contribute to a sense of unity, therefore, through that axiomatic sense that we all have at the spiritual or intuitive level. Just like we all have a sense of goodness, an ethical sense or an archaic sense, we all have a sense of the truth, an alethic sense of what is. We all have an aesthetic sense of what constitutes beauty, and we all have an authentic sense. We know what it is, what we're doing when we're acting. So the 5 contributions of awakening consciousness to the interconscious world is the socioverse. And so from the unity that is contributed along with power, goodness, truth, and beauty, we have all of it integrated into the socioverse, the community. And that's based upon a conversation of truth with itself through dialogue with human beings. It's the communion that we all share in terms of our feeling. It doesn't matter whether it's at a festivity or a repast or a worship ceremony or a tabernacle, doesn't matter. The point is that philic feeling, that sense of being part of a larger whole and communing with the essences together, consciously together, interconsciously. That's communion. Co-creation is when we use our authentic sense in order to create something in tandem with other conscious beings. So collaboration, conversation, communion, and creation create that community. Our sense of goodness happens through collaboration. All in all, when we come right down to it, we're all hanging on the Elsic cross. We're intuiting, at the same time we're thinking, doing, willing, and feeling on the cross that has the samsara of time, space, entity, and causality. This is the continuum which holds us fast. We have the rays of self that are constantly interacting with it. As we move up on the pyramid of ontology toward the higher, more refined levels of being, it expands consciousness to become more empowered, more enlightened, more endearing, and more emancipated, so that it is truly happy and experiences eudaimonia. And that, of course, is the Parasa cross, where what was before willing now becomes virtue. What was before thinking becomes wisdom. What was before love has now become, or pardon me, what was before feeling has now become love. And what was before acting or doing has become care. Altogether balanced, this is happiness. With power, goodness, truth, and beauty, the senses all come to fruition in the emancipating, endearing, empowering, enlightening eudaimonia. So for the next time, we will be considering the seventh of our ideas, parousia, all by itself. It's the self by itself, just as with the psychonaut, today we consider the self into itself. And moving into the inner scape of one's own self-consciousness is always an invitation to move into the central reality, in which one actualizes what were potentials and are transfinite experiences that can ever spiral into sagas of expanding consciousness. So until that next session, behave when you must. Be good whenever you can. But above all else, be yourself.